I finished reading Sugar and Salt by Susan Wiggs. This is the blind date of the book that I got from Kiss and Tale on my shopping trip with my friend Lauren. And I was really excited to get into it because it's my first blind date with a book boyfriend. No, blind date with a book, not book boyfriend. Okay. Anyway, so the book starts off with the prologue, which focuses on a snapshot in Margot's life where she wins an award, and then a character from her past kind of comes in. So then part one jumps into her finding the restaurant. So we don't go fully back in her past yet. Just a couple of years where she is finding her restaurant, building her restaurant. She decides to open her restaurant next to a bakery in a space that used to be for a Mexican restaurant, and they share the kitchen. And part of the reason why she decides to build her restaurant there is because she wants to call her restaurant Salt. The bakery is called Sugar, and she had a barbecue truck called Salt and Sugar, or Sugar and Salt, one of the two. So she's focusing on barbecue, and part one really focuses on her finding the space, starting to create this restaurant, build this restaurant. She also meets Ida B, who is the owner of the bakery, and her son Jerome, who is running the bakery for Ida. In fact, she kind of, he startles her in the morning, like really early in the morning. So she thinks he's attacking her. So she like drop kicks him against the wall and then realize who he is. So there's kind of that. And then at the end of part one, she finds a old newspaper with a photograph of Ida B and this white guy. And this is where we go into part two. Now, part two keeps skipping back and forth between the past, where we learn more about Ida B and her relationship with Francis. And this is at the time of the 70s and the Vietnam draft. So we also have racial tension because Ida B is African American and Francis is black, and not black, he's white, and he comes from like this East Coast family, and he's going to school to be a doctor. So you have that issue. I don't know how to say that tension, and then you also have the tension of the Vietnam draft. And then again, it keeps going back and forth to the present, where Margot is trying to create her restaurant. The first night of the restaurant, I think, is in this one. I'm looking at my notes. Yes, first, the opening night for Salt, and also a building relationship of Jerome, because they like kind of like each other. So they're like slowly building a relationship. Jerome has been married before and has 2 kids because he's now divorced. So they're just like slowly building their relationship. But again, we're not getting a whole lot of that because it keeps flipping back to the past. So we don't really get to see that build of relationship. Like, he talks to his son about the first date, but we don't actually get to see the first date. And that was kind of frustrating for me. And we find out some other things about Ida's relationship with Francis before, and he actually ends up leaving because he gets drafted and he doesn't want to go fight in the war. So he ends up leaving and fleeing and going to Canada. And then after he goes to Canada, Ida meets Jerome's father. So that's part 2. Part 3 now flashes back to Margot's past, where she meets this guy, kind of a richy guy, in her town that she's in Texas, where she's just trying to make a living and learn all that she can about barbecue. And she goes on a date with him, decides to maybe give him a second date, and then, it decides, I'm not going to go on the second date with you. But then he did not like that, so he comes over to her place and attacks her and assaults her. So that happens. She ends up hurting him, and he ends up going, because she hurt him in a way he couldn't come back from. Let's put it that way. I don't know how else to say it that won't get things banned. So hurts him in a way he can't come back from. I like that way. But because he's from this wealthy family, the family turns the tables on her, and instead of her getting help, she gets thrown in jail, where she then finds out that she's pregnant, and the family just keeps putting up blockade after blockade after blockade for her trying to get out. She doesn't have any money, so she just has a public defender. They put up the blockades, so she basically runs out of time and is going to have this baby. So ultimately she decides on adoption, and that ends up being her kind of salvation in a way, because it helps give her access to more people and more people who can help her, and ultimately gets her free and her case dismissed, because it was clearly done in self-defense, but because the parents, are so upset and don't want to believe that their child is horrible, that, they're trying to pin it all on her and make her the bad guy, which is horrible. So bad. So ultimately she gets out, she does have the baby, gives it up for adoption, and then leaves. And this is where we kind of picked up in the first part with her having the food truck, finding investors, and starting her restaurant. So part 3 really focuses on that part of her story. Part 4 is this is where we rejoin her telling Jerome her story, because again, they're trying to build a relationship so he understands where she's coming from, why she's hesitant to have a relationship with him. And it's kind of weird to me, because he was just like, after hearing her story, which she is incredibly brave and so strong to have gone through, he's like, I love you. She's like, okay. Because, again, she can't say it back because of all she's been through, so it's a little strange. And then the family so the family is trying to, that put her in jail, is trying to build a statue and a football stadium to remember their golden child who was, a bad guy. And so she ends up deciding to come out and tell her story. And of course, this is where we come back in from the prologue, where she is sued for defamation, I think is how you say it, saying something that's not true, even though it is. So she has to go back to the town to go for this case now, which ultimately gets thrown out. This family really thinks like they can get away with a lot of things, and then find out they really can't. But they try very hard. Like, they have lots of friends who are judges, but luckily somehow they end up not being the judge for the case. And she also has the opportunity to meet and make a connection with her son, even though it's a very small connection of just like, hey, I'm your biological mom. It's still nice that she got to do that, and she got to, because initially when she did the adoption, she was like, no, I don't want any information from the couple. So some of the issues I had with the book is, as you can tell from my synopsis, there is a lot of going there is a lot going on. Again, there's a lot of different stories being told. There's a lot of flipping back and forth between past and present, and it can get kind of confusing. There's a lot of heavy topics. Again, the Vietnam draft, the Vietnam War, the assault, the interracial relationships, dating, things like that. Those are all very topics, and there's a lot of them. And I felt like there was just so much going on in this book that it was kind of hard to enjoy it because there was just so much going on. Also, the cover doesn't really match the book. Like, looking at the cover, I would not think that there was a lot of heavy topics going on. Not that the cover does have to say that, but also, she's not the baker. He is. She's the barbecue person. So, I'm not quite sure why they decided to have her on the front with cake, but hey, it looks beautiful and delicious. So there is that. There also the relationship between Margot and Jerome. Again, it was just like they're moving slow, but we never saw it. We saw glimpses, we saw moments, but I didn't feel like I was seeing a lot of the relationship. So to me, it kind of came out of left field when he was like, I love you. Where was the build up to that? I don't know. I felt like I didn't see it, but maybe someone else who read it would see that. So, hey, if you enjoyed this book, great. I'm glad you loved it. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It just wasn't what I was thinking it was or what I was expecting it to be, and that's on me. I just didn't love it. So I will probably donate this or pass it along to somebody else who I think might enjoy it. And that's my book review. Happy reading.